Bibliophiles of the internet, my name's Adriana, and if you're watching this, then I'm going through with it. I am making a reading vlog all about my experience reading Infinity Sun by Adam Silvera, aka his first ever fantasy book. So what do I know about Infinity Sun, besides the fact that I keep accidentally referring to it as Infinity War? Not much, I have to admit. I know it's not high fantasy, but more of a contemporary fantasy or urban fantasy, and that it's about the divide between celestials and specters. I think celestials come into their power naturally, while specters violently steal the essence of magical creatures to artificially create their magic, which is definitely giving me Dragon Prince type vibes. I know the story follows two twin brothers, Emil and Brighton, and I believe they're both turning 18, and one of them comes into his powers and the other does not. The official synopsis says that brotherhood and love will be tested, and I don't know, I think it's a hangover from my Full Metal Alchemist days, but the word brotherhood is an automatic buzzword for me, so I am all in on this. Now, I have to be honest, I have not loved Adam's work in the past. And that's wild for me to even say because it just seems like everything he does should so obviously be my brand. He's a queer Latinx author writing about queer Latinx teens with a focus on emotional, thoughtful, meaningful work. But every time I've read something from him before, there's just something that keeps me from loving it and I don't fully connect. I'm hoping because this is kind of a departure from his usual contemporary stories that it might hit different, but I am by no means on the hype train and I'll definitely be going into this with a healthy amount of wariness. So I am hopefully going to start on this today and I will check back in with my first impressions in my next update. So it is now Saturday morning. I'm about 50 pages into Infinity Sun and I had to stop myself so I could give you my truest first impressions. I'm probably going to put the cover up somewhere because as you can see, I just now have the naked hardback. So what do I think of Infinity Sun so far? Well, I am invested, but I have some mixed thoughts. I definitely want to start out by saying that there's some really cool world building ideas. It's basically the world as we know it, plus magic. So you can study alchemy in college and you can undergo magical drug trials for medical treatment. Plus there's animals we already know, and then there's also like mythical creatures such as hydras and phoenixes. There's definitely a clear distinction between the two brothers. Emil is more of a logical, sensible, even-headed guy with a very stalwart moral compass, and Brighton is more of a bold, charismatic, daring social media star and online reporter, and he has a very dark fascination with magic, whereas Emil just sort of accepts its existence. I have to say right now I feel more compelled towards Brighton because I think he's a little bit more emotionally complex. His life is by no means perfect, but you definitely get the sense that there are things that he should be grateful about. He has a loving family and a bright future. He has found relative success on social media, but he still feels an emptiness within him, and there are still times where he feels like it's just not what he wants. So there's a darkness and a dissatisfaction in him that I find really interesting, and I kind of feel like it's lacking from Emil, who seems to be our main protagonist. I did come across a few tiny red flags that I want to discuss. The first and biggest thing is that there's some strange social justice parallels between our world and what's happening with the Celestials, which are the magic wielders in this universe, and it kind of feels like they're being cast as the monolithic oppressed group. So for example, Emil talks about how Celestials are more likely to be viewed as terrorists after some kind of magical tragic event, or how they're more likely to be targeted by police or less likely to be socially accepted by the public. I'm definitely going to keep an eye out for that because while it's good and important to be able to have those conversations within this world that's being built, to have those conversations without the context of systemic racism, Islamophobia, homophobia, xenophobia, it just makes those conversations feel incomplete. I don't want to see Celestials become a kind of catch-all for every minority group and all social issues because then that doesn't do those issues justice. Another thing I noticed that just doesn't really gel with me personally is that the Celestials we see in the opening scenes definitely feel more like superheroes, which is kind of cheesier than what I was hoping for, but I'm trying to reserve judgment until I see more about how their magic works. That was also something I noted for myself. There seems to be a lot of confusing references to Celestials and specters, and it kind of seems like their magic manifests manifests in a different way for every single person, but it's unclear how or why that happens. There's also some times where the language and the writing sort of throws me. I specifically marked a passage on page 11 that has a really bad simile, so I'm gonna read you that right now. To give you some context, in this moment there's been an incident between Celestials and a specter, and so the streets have become very dangerous and a lot of people have left. And in his narration, Emil says, most of the patrons and residents cleared out already like geniuses with A+ survival skills. That's it. That's the sentence. That's the simile they decided to keep in every single pass of this book. It's so minor, but it's just like sometimes the writing and we do not get along sometimes. And I don't know why that is, and I hope it sort of smooths out as we continue the story. But to close out my first impressions on a more positive note, I do want to say there's been a really good establishment of tension between these two brothers. You can tell they really love each other and that they're really close, but also that they believe very different things in very different ways, and they have very distinct ideas about justice and honor and loyalty and fairness. So I'm really curious to see how that divide between them might shrink or grow or just implode on itself completely as we continue through this book. So those are my initial thoughts on Infinity Son. Obviously, I'm kind of all over the place. I want to really love it. I'm kind of invested in some respects I'm not, and other things I'm keeping an eye on to make sure they don't explode in my face. But you know, when you're 50 pages in, you're kind of along for the ride for better or worse. So pray for me, wish me luck. I'm going to keep reading and taking notes, and I will be back later with another update. So it's currently Sunday. I have about triple my page count since yesterday at this point, and first thing I want to mention is some warnings for triggering content. First, there have been several mentions of parental death from more than one character. Nothing graphic about it, just a general exploration of that loss. Emil has also mentioned his anxiety a few times, and there have been some brief depictions of panic attacks. Another really important content warning I want to share is that this story also mentions and describes, in non-graphic terms, self-harm, specifically self-harm revolving around food deprivation and self-starvation. Again, it's not graphic, but it is discussed in no uncertain terms by more than one character, especially in relation to their grief, so definitely be conscious of that content. As I talked about before, I have been keeping an eye on the celestial oppression plot points, and I don't think it's gotten any better since my last update. On page 51, there's a really long paragraph about how Celestials need better jobs and how Celestial mothers are detained by authorities and forced to give birth to their children underground, and the corruption of the enforcers, which are basically magical police officers. And again, those are very real issues that definitely warrant discussion, but when they're assigned to this group of fictional people who we still don't know very much about, it just doesn't seem like the best way to frame those issues and make them feel nuanced and close. I really don't want to sound like a broken record Debbie Downer, but I'm almost near the halfway point and we still don't know much about Celestials and Spectres and their magic. I know more about how Celestials are named after the constellations that give them power than how their power actually works. And there's all these confusing mentions of Gleamcraft and how some magic wielders use wands and others don't, and there's a bunch of randomly capitalized words to emphasize things that are narratively important, but I don't know what they are and I don't know why they're important. Long story short, the world building is lacking in my personal opinion, but the interpersonal and emotional dynamics are 100% A+, full credit. Obviously, I'm not going to spoil anything, but very interesting things have been happening with Emil. He finally came into his powers. I'm not going to say how or what they are, but it was done in a way I did not expect. Turns out he's more of a complicated character than I gave him credit for. I felt a little bad for saying he wasn't interesting, which I stand by because Brighton still has my full attention, but I'm predicting his whole journey is going to be about going from the sidelines to the spotlight. And I think that's a really fascinating dynamic, that Emil is so introverted and passive, and yet he's come into these very strong, unique powers. And even though his personality goes against it, powers are typically meant to be used in some way. Even though the world building has been kind of cringe for me so far, I'm trying to focus on the brotherhood between Emil and Brighton because I think that's definitely the story's strongest point. Their bond is so strong and pure, and they know each other in a way that no one else can, and I'm very curious to see the strain this difference in power is inevitably going to bring to their relationship. I actually left off after a huge info dumpy reveal. I'm not trying to be petty, these are just facts. But I will continue to soldier on and check back in later with more of my thoughts. It's been a couple days since my last update, and I'm now less than 50 pages away from finally finishing this book. This reading experience continues to be a roller coaster ride. It's really hard because I don't think that this story is without merit. I do find myself compelled to read it and see how it ends, so obviously there's something there, but it just feels so amateurish around the edges. For example, like 150 pages in, we get our first mention of ghosts being a part of this world and being considered mythical creatures that specters can obtain power from, which is wild because no one has referenced them up to this point. This world just feels so underdeveloped, so unexplained. I was reading last night and I realized that the characters keep talking about this war. They hate the war, they want to end the war, so many folks have died because of this war, but I don't actually know why Celestials and Spectres are fighting in the first place, and it hasn't been mentioned up until this point. I have to imagine it began because Celestials have natural power and Spectres forcibly take their powers from innocent creatures, but then there's all that talk about discrimination against Celestials by the public, which also doesn't make sense because wouldn't the public be against anyone with unchecked powers, including specters? If anything, shouldn't this power struggle be between humanity and all magic users? And the other strange thing is that even though it seems like a life and death situation for the Celestials and the Specters, it doesn't seem like the rest of the world is affected by this war, which doesn't sit well with me because obviously superpowered individuals would upset the balance of day-to-day life, at least you would think. So I don't know, I'm at a loss. I feel like this story has a lot of really interesting ideas, but for me, none of them seem to work together the way that they should. But on the positive side, the characterization of Emil and Brighton at least continues to be very strong. I think the bigger picture of Emil's storyline is about how we grapple with impossible legacies of hate and violence that we inherit, and I think the irony of these brothers' lives continues to make the most impact. It's interesting to see how Emil's sensitivity and empathy may turn out to be his greatest strength, even though he has these incredible powers, and how Brighton has to find other ways to contribute to the cause because he has so much fight and fierceness in his heart, but no powers to use. And I do appreciate how Adam Silvera builds up these two characters and then pushes them to the breaking point. I also kind of feel like I can see that last big twist that's bound to happen in the final act, just like all the other big twists and reveals have felt somewhat cliche, but I'm definitely still eager to see how it all concludes. So I will check back in again with what will most likely be my final update and closing thoughts. But let's be realistic. I don't see anything happening in these last 50 pages that's gonna skyrocket this to being a 5-star book. I can only call it as I see it. Well, I finished it, and everything I thought would happen, happened. So let me just start by saying, deadass, I don't even have the book on me anymore. She is gone. She is donated. She is off to a better life with a loving family. I even have photos of her in my car on the way to getting donated as proof. She is gone. I could not even bring myself to continue to share space. I'm going to try to keep this conclusion brief because I'm not going to say anything remarkable. My opinion did not magically change overnight. I think my feelings towards this story have been very clear, and obviously I'm disappointed and I did not enjoy it. But I did also want to quickly mention another trigger warning for mild instances of body dysmorphia, so if that is sensitive for you, please be aware that it is discussed in this book. If you take nothing else away from this vlog, please take this. It is extremely problematic for Celestials to be cast as the main oppressed group in this society because oppressed, marginalized groups are not monolithic and intersectionality is a thing. And the way it's written in this story is just a surface level acknowledgement that social issues exist. Maybe it would have been different if that oppression actually came into play at any time in this story, but it just sat there and nothing was done with it. And also the pacing of this final act was wild because there was this huge confrontation that still had to happen, and here I am thinking surely that's going to be a lead into book 2 because there's only a few pages left. But the author was like, YOLO, I'm going to make this huge fight scene happen in like 2 pages, and I'm there like, what could you possibly mean? You can't do this. You think you can do these things, Nemo, but you just can't. And of course there was one last big reveal, which I'm not going to spoil, but it made me cringe so hard that I had to physically put down the book. In summation, the world building was a huge no for me. The magic system, if you can call it that, was a no for me. Most of the plot was a no for me, and the only thing I could really engage with was the 2 main characters, their brotherhood, and their emotional dynamic, and that's about it. Trust me when I say the person most disappointed by this reading experience has been me, because I was really hoping it was going to be something exciting and hard-hitting and different. And even though I was invested enough to finish out the book, which is a pretty good marker of whether a story has done its most basic job, I wasn't really left with anything I wanted to take away from this reading experience. In conclusion, sometimes that fun idea you had for a reading vlog bites you in the ass. But if you would like to see me do more individual dedicated reading vlogs, leave me a comment with a flame emoji down below and let me know which books you would like to see me discuss. I hope you did enjoy this video because that would make at least one of us. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you on the flip side of the page. Bye!